Welcome to Friday night's video on our second master series. This, I do believe, is the 42nd video in our second master series and the third video on dealing with stereo field meters, phase meters, and correlation meters. So basically, when we get in here, the first thing I wanted to say after the last couple videos, is that, it's basic things we're working with that we're trying to deal with most of the time. As you become more and more advanced, that little things make a big difference, like we've talked about every moment in time. So that's going to develop as you develop your skills and as you get used to keeping the meter open and looking for issues, because slight differences can make a world of difference. Now, if you've got something like this, like my ozone imager here, that, dealing with what we're talking about normally with like a polar sample, polar levels, or a lysogist or something like that, these are a little bit different ways to visualize it. So I do, different visualizations of what are happening are fine. Just make sure that whatever plugin you're looking at, you understand with the information it's trying to display, because we're dealing with phase and stereo field issues and correlation issues, and understand the meter you're dealing with no matter which meter it is. That's a huge thing to get in your head and research it. I'm just going to show you here, we're just looking at my basic phase meter that I have in my studio, which should be fine for displaying it. Now, when we first started talking about it, if we're trying to deal with a full stereo field or something, you're going to get a nice picture like this. I mean, most of the time, this is going to be fluctuating some. There's no doubt about it. It's going to be fluctuating back in here. A good stereo image, this is going to be fluctuating some. Not drastically either direction, but it's going to be fluctuating. And you get a nice round stereo field happening there. Nice, like a beautiful fireworks show, that's nice and round and full. And yeah, dude, that's what you're basically looking for most of the time when you're trying to get nice stereo field work. Whether or not you can accomplish that or not is a different story, depending on how much work you do, how good of a job you've done recording it and working on it, and whatever you might do. And sometimes processing the things you do change that to where that may not look as such a perfect stereo field, but it sounds better for what you're trying to do. So that can always be debatable. So that's the quote unquote, looking for a nice stereo field. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what you're going to be shooting for to do a good job on the production you're working on. So really keep that in mind. Now, when we're looking at our stereo field meters here, that there's a couple things that, we really want to take into consideration. First of all, if I've got, like even this is a stereo track, but it's a bounce track of mono. So it's basically they're two equal mono tracks that are the same. So it's going to be reading mono. So on my phase meter, it's really just going to be giving me straight up mono. And you're going to be able to read that. This is going to read off to the right. That's going to be mono. Now, as far as what it's going to be telling us, is this is a mono axis. Obviously, this is a left, this is a right axis. And sometimes maybe your meter will be showing you like mid-side information. It'll be shooting off at an angle like this if you're doing mid-side work. But you really want to look at whatever meter you're working with to make sure you really understand your meter, what's going on. And then you get something like this that's going straight across. A lot of times that'll be that one channel is totally out of phase of the other channel. It may or may not be registering it, or it may not be completely and totally out of a phase and almost getting a phase cancellation effect, completely out of phase of the other channel, and you'd be getting a flat line going across here. Now, anytime you take care, even on this one right here, if I just go across here and I start moving it right or left just on the panning, it's moving towards the right and left, just this mono effect. So looking at it from here is a really good example, because then we're just dealing with a mono stereo track, so that we can really visualize that and understand that it's going off to the left or right, and it's really going right. It's not going to go any farther with our panning unless it's really starting to get out of phase really bad. So that's a really simple way to visualize that, to understand whenever it's jumping around, it's leaning right or left, you're hitting something, it's going towards the left or hitting left or right and things like that. Or if something's getting really out of phase, it's really starting to try to flatline on you so that you can visualize these simple things that are happening. So now if I take this and I take this and I go over to here and do the same thing and I try to invert one side or the other, you see that it's going to, well, it's not showing you real well, but you can see down in here, it's going off to the right. Or if I do it the other way, it's going off to the left over in here is where it should be going. You're doing it here, it's not showing anything because it's completely out of phase of each other and canceling out, but it would be heading towards this flatlining effect. So it's a pretty simple concept of what you're looking at when you're looking at this meter, so that you don't get confused about what's happening. So those are the basic constructs. If you're looking at this thing going over here and it's heading over in this direction, it's a reversed phase mono heading towards that direction. So in a good stereo track, or even a bad stereo track, let's put it on down here with this stereo track and loop this. Then if I put it on here and I push play, that I'm going to get this dancing around more than likely. This is heading towards that direction, and it's heading towards that direction, it's heading towards that direction. It's bouncing around a little bit. If it's somewhat pretty good stereo, it's going to stay close in this area. But you can see that this stereo track is bouncing all over the place. I mean, it's going off to the right, left, and it's doing all kinds of stuff that this track has not been edited or worked on at all. So, I mean, that concept is pretty simple. So, as long as you're not heading anywhere too far in either direction here, you're not having any type of reversed phase mono issue, and you're not having it monoing out on you if you're not wanting it to. And being able to see a mono track is fairly simple. And even if a mono track you want it going right or left, that you're able to visualize that pretty easily, that, even if you've got a mono track, but you want it off to the right or left, that you can visualize that it's still moving off to one side or the other, but it's still mono, you can tell. All right, so it's a pretty simple concept. Now, the bigger concept that we really want to get into is footprints and understanding what's happening there. So the basic understanding of the phase meter, stereo field meter, and things like that, it's not that difficult of a concept. You understand basically what it's trying to tell you and the simple thing it's trying to tell you. And you understand that in music that sometimes it's kind of complicated. So you looking for some set thing that's like, it's just like that. And then, oh my God, it all of a sudden changed or something. Well, if you start getting like that, you're going to probably have an issue and be one of those people dying in front of the mixing board trying to get your mix done, because it's going to move around like this. I mean, if in a good track, a stereo track, that it's going to move around. You got a mono track, you don't have to worry about that at all. And when you start trying to work on stuff that's somewhere in between there, and or when you've processed things that's caused some type of effect for something to change. So because sometimes things will affect one side or the other a little bit differently where you wouldn't think it would, but it did. And it's like, why? Well, there's a lot of math involved. So trying to track that down can be very difficult at times. And we talked about in the last video this never-ending changing footprint, and then we looked at what was going on. It's pretty complicated. So what you trying to track all that down and fix every one of those things till you got some perfect stereo field, or so they all stay in one way all the way across, it can be difficult. So with that in mind, that your phase meter is really, your stereo field phase meter, correlation meter, is really its first objective. You want to have it open. We talk about that a lot, about you having it open and all the time, so you can see footprints and how things are developing and start to develop an understanding of when you hear a problem or you're investigating what might be a problem, that you start trusting your eyes and trusting your meters, not just your ears, so that you can develop yourself as an engineer. And with that in mind, and the concept that we talked about of every moment in time is important, to where you're taking your phase meter, your stereo field meter really seriously, besides just your ears, and you start flagging stuff. You got a chorus or something, or a verse, or a bridge, or it's an instrumental and it's, a movement, in an instrumental part, or a movie score or whatever, that you start flagging stuff that you're not really sure if that's an issue or not. But the better you get as an engineer, if it looks different and it's questionable, that you want to flag it and go find out what's going on to become that quote next level audio engineer. That's obvious, right? So that's what we're shooting for, and this meter is going to help you do that. So how do we apply that? So what I've said so far is pretty, some of it's pretty obvious, and any of it that wasn't pretty obvious, hopefully that it's fairly clear now, the simple things that it's trying to tell you. Now, once the simple things that it's trying to tell you are basically understood, and you understand why you want to keep it open just for those simple issues you might run into, why do you want to keep it open for these more complex issues? To make you become that next level audio engineer, because you may just be pulling it out if you have a problem with your system or your room or your miking, or when you're checking an issue that you hear something funky, so you're going to check it out. But you having it open all the time to really develop yourself as an engineer and seeing what's going on is that next logical step, which, as you might guess, is it's going to take some work on your part and time for you using it, having it open. But it's a great excuse to get yourself a bunch more monitors, bro. There's no doubt about that. So, that's an excuse enough for me, because I like my room to look like Star Trek, bro. I've only got 2 monitors right now, and I've got a phone that I keep hooked up, and I got an iPad. But, it's like, because I would like to have a bunch more monitors, and I probably will, but I don't right now, because I've been trying to keep myself from having monitors splattered all over my room, everywhere behind me with little mirrors, and it's like, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so it's, it's one of those things that we're not going to get into in the next video, to really sit down and analyze what could be happening there, if it can be fixed, and things like that. So we start getting used to trying to look for footprints like we did when we were talking about the scope, so that we may not be looking for this quote unquote little perfect footprint like I showed you on a nice stereo field, but we start to really look at things, flag things, and go, okay, I'm looking at that. What does that sound like? What is that? Is that going to be okay? And when I start fussing with things that, I might have a track, it's not always just, all the way across this, chorus or this verse or something. I might have one word, and I go in here and start cutting this track, to where I'm going, well, I'm going in here, I'm cutting here and here, and I'm going to do something funky with this one word or something like that, and then I'm going to pull out I'll be looking at my phase meter as what the heck I'm doing with it, so that I can understand, what sounds good, what doesn't, and, start to build to visualize that other than just hearing it, because sometimes you get going and things are slight, it's like when I first started doing productions, and I still have problems with phase problems. Trust me on this, because I love stereo field work. So, and working with only 2 speakers most of the time, just doing stereo in a production, that trying to get as much stereo field out of it can cause phase problems. And you can run into phase problems all the time and really be fussing with things, trying to hear something it ain't quite right and visualize it. Is it a problem? Is it not? I can hear it, I can see it. Because if you start really getting to become that next level audio engineer, you will find that stereo field work is awesome, dude. Besides just looking for phase problems, which we'll look at also, correlation problems and things like that, mono issues, that stereo field work is cool, bro, because you can take a simple production that isn't all that badass, bro, and start doing some work with the stereo field to make it bam in your face and huge, and all of a sudden, it didn't sound all that good, and then I got done doing all the stereo field work, and it just sounds full, thick, rich, and just lush, and it's like, yeah, dude, I did that with just a bass guitar and a vocalist, and it just sounds whoosh, and and a kick drum going bump, bump in the background, and it just sounds wham, and I know that sounds funny, but the more you get used to using that stereo field work, that you'll come to understanding that you can run into phase issues. So becoming that next level audio engineer is going to be really important. So peace, help, love. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next video when we start looking for footprints.